What's the quickest way you saw a coworker get fired? I hired a woman who interviewed very well. Her job was administration, taking calls and scheduling appointments, creating a schedule for 17 salespeople, not very intense. She was in training. 2 different people would be training her, alternating days. Day 1, all was fine. Day 2, just the normal feedback on how fast she was picking things up. Day 3, feedback was that the trainer thinks the new person was fondling herself at her desk. She questioned what she saw but wanted it noted. Day 4, feedback from the other trainer mimicked what the first had seen but was adamant it happened. And the new person was wearing a skirt every day and touching the desk and the phones and the logbook and the pens and the doorknobs. Day 5, lunchtime. The new person went to lunch. Both trainers got someone else to answer the phones while they came to me to report that indeed the new girl was pleasuring herself at her desk on company time, and what the heck is up with that, and why can't she do this at home? And they looked it up, and it can be an obsession for some people, and they do not want to work with her anymore. So when the new person returned from lunch, I caught her as she got back into the building and said, "Can you please come into my office? I need to discuss something with you." HR was already in my office. The new woman said, "I know what this is about, I'll just quit." She left. We mailed her check to her, sanitized the office, got a new chair for that desk, and never heard from her again. This is insane. This is wild. Day 1 starts off fine. How's she doing? Yeah, she's great, doing great. Day 2, picking up things really well. And then the days after that, boss, something weird is going on. We think she's, you know what? Who does that? Clearly this is not the first time this has happened with this lady. The way she reacted was "Don't worry, I'll leave." It's you learn something new every day, huh? I work in a steel foundry and my boss hired a guy last year. First day is orientation and my boss lets this guy and another that was in orientation to leave early to go to Red Wing and pick up some required and company paid for boots. The guy shows up the next day wearing sneakers, says he fell asleep and didn't make it to Red Wing. My boss tells him he can't be out in the plant in sneakers. This is 7 a.m., so my boss tells him to go home and when Red Wing opens at 8:30, get some boots and come back. About noon, he isn't back yet and isn't answering his phone. Boss calls Red Wing and they say he hasn't been there. Boss tells them to not give him boots if he shows up. An hour later, he calls my boss saying Red Wing wouldn't give him any boots. When my boss asked him why he didn't go at 8:30 like he was told, he gave the same "I fell asleep" excuse. He was crying about how nobody will give him a chance when my boss told him he wasn't wasting any more time with him. You were given a chance and blew it because you couldn't be bothered to pick up free work boots. Seriously, though, what is this guy's problem? The audacity to play the "no one gives me a chance" card. Seriously, how do you snooze your way out of a job, trade your job for a nap? How do you do that? And on top of that, the guy didn't just fire you the first time. You did it again. All over boots. You could have had free boots. What's wrong with you? My first job out of university was a severely underpaid junior position. Go figure. I stayed there for about 2 years and made really good friends with an older coworker, Martha. I freelanced for other companies the entire time I was there and left after one of them made me a job offer that was too good to refuse. A few years later, I'm a key employee in a company of 25 people, quite large for the field, and I make in a month what I used to make in a year at my old job. I don't talk about it or show it though. As I was working insane hours at the time, my boss, the company owner, wanted to hire someone to lighten my workload and do the legwork on a few of my projects. Since this is what Martha did at my old job, and since she had recently started her own freelancing practice, I recommended her. She did the interview with my boss and got the job. Within a few hours of her first day, my boss forwards me 2 emails. The first one is a lengthy message from Martha to my boss saying how she's just reviewed my work, she's had it for at least a month, finds it lacking, which isn't surprising due to my lack of experience, and that she suggests she take over projects A, B, C, and D from me. The second email was my boss asking Martha to invoice us for any work she may have done and to not contact anyone from the company ever again. Martha, you really screwed that one up. The guy got you a really nice setup, instead you try to take his job, right out the gate? Whoa. Also, OP, it sounds like you have a great boss, and one who's actually willing to stick with you, because some bosses might be sure, she's right, I'll get rid of you. But this guy didn't, which is really awesome. So, good for you for having a great boss, and awesome that Martha isn't working with you anymore. In my old office, a firm-wide email was sent out announcing the arrival of a new employee. We will call him Paul. So Paul decided to reply all to let all of us know that he was aware of our recent legal defeats. that many people should be fired for these failures and that his hiring was the first good thing our firm had done in years. The dude was a legal assistant right out of college with no experience. A minute after the email went out, I heard a crazy shout and then watched one of the senior partners run past my office towards HR, and 5 minutes later, Paul walked past with the HR manager and a security escort. He lasted less than 45 minutes. I worked at a lotteries company. A guy working in testing got access to production data and printed off some test tickets with some unclaimed winning numbers. He only did low amounts, like 500, and claimed 3 of them in completely 3 different locations around town. Of course, the company was really interested in the story of someone who found a 6-month-old lottery ticket and claimed it, but they were even more interested to find out it was the same person going to 3 locations. Needless to say, when they realized the guy actually worked in the company, he got pulled into a room with cops awaiting him. When I was in high school, I used to do seasonal work at haunted houses, which I did for 4 years. A new guy they hired was supposed to help with parking. Now, in the 3 years that I worked at this haunted house, they never once charged people for parking. It was a very dark parking lot off of a cliff, so I had to make sure no one drove off of it trying to park. This cheeky son of a gun started charging people $5 to park. It was only found out after someone complained they didn't have the money to go in with their friends since they had to pay for parking. I think the guy was only there a couple of hours before he got fired. Early in my career, I was an engineer on a refinery in the United Kingdom, and I was in charge of the quality control lab. By law, we had to have external independent testing on the refinery field products to confirm they complied with government regulations. It seemed that to get a job with a testing company, you had to be an adult and have a driving license. The lab had a lot of very nasty chemicals either being tested or used in the testing or cleaning of the oil products. A new young girl turned up for the testing company and was dipping her finger into a chemical called phenol and stating that it makes your hand and arm go numb. Phenol is a severe muscle relaxant, including your heart, and can kill you at very low concentrations. 1 hour into her employment, we had paramedics on the scene monitoring her vitals, and she was released after 8 hours. She didn't last the first hour of the first day, and the testing company was fined pretty heavily. A guy got hired in the first firm I ever worked for. Turns up for the first morning at work, and within an hour has emailed the entire company, 6,000 people, about his band and their availability for birthdays, weddings, etc. He was dismissed by lunchtime. I was working in a place that made food items. You could have as many of these as you liked while at work, but you can only take one home with you. A guy gets hired and takes advantage of this and consumes a bucket load of these items at work, which is fine, that's the deal. He then goes to leave for the day and security asks to check his bag. He hesitates and asks security if they could just check it tomorrow instead. They say no and he says, "I do have some items in there. I haven't left the site yet. Can I put them in your fridge?" Security relents and lets him do this. Security then checks the fridge and there's 18 items in there that weren't before. The guy is immediately terminated, lost his job over $8 worth of products. Interviewed a guy that was replacing someone who was leaving, offered the job and was supposed to start the next day. Just so happened that we were having a going away party for the leaving dude that night, so new guy was invited as a chance to get to know the team. New guy shows up and proceeds to get absolutely crap-faced and asked the head of HR if she wanted to go back to his place because he got a vibe during the interview process. Next day, new guy is a no-show, so we were thinking bullet dodged. He shows up just before lunch, clearly hungover, making up some excuse for being late. Big boss came out and told the guy to get the frick out. I worked as a temporary employee during summer holidays some years back, and there were a few more of us doing a week here or there during summer. One of them started on a Tuesday. The next day he was nowhere to be found after lunch. About 2 hours later he shows up ready for action. Turns out the grocery store across the street didn't have the right ham to put on his sandwich, so he took a bus into the city center and found the right ham there. He was pretty upset when he got told to go home and that he would only get paid for the first 3 hours of the day. He couldn't fathom how it was his fault that the closest grocery didn't have what he needed. Coworker got promoted to team lead. He poached an employee from my team. Once the employee was reporting to him, he starts threatening the employee's immigration work visa status. Employee goes right to human resources. He is Indian, but he's not on visa. He's a citizen. Dude went from promoted due to excellent performance to fired for his discriminatory behavior in about 2 days. I work in a strip club, so turnover is extremely high, but the owner of our club met this girl who needed a job/place to live. He set her up with a job at the club, and since we are in partnership with a certain hotel, he had her deposit comped and paid for a few nights for her in the room. 6 hours later, he gets a call that the hotel is calling the police and reporting his club as well. She goes into the hotel room, smokes it out, and then invites 5 dudes to come over and tear up the room. They were all extremely loud, so people complained, which led to the owner being contacted. The room was so smoked out, it was leaking under the hotel door. Within 6 hours, she was back to having no job and being homeless once again. I worked at a soul-crushing software development company for 6 months. It nearly killed me. They turfed my butt because I was basically losing my freaking marbles. A week later, some guy turns up, knocks on the front door, and hands over a curriculum vitae. This was in 2010, and the company was out in the middle of nowhere, so this alone was extremely weird. For lack of any other applicants, due to the company's reputation for being soul-crushing, they hired him. Day one, he pulls out his phone in the lunchroom and starts watching something that definitely wasn't suitable for work. Not getting handsy, just watching it like it was an entirely normal thing to do. He was unemployed 3 minutes later. When I was a teenager, I worked at a restaurant as a hostess, and they hired this guy who was 20 to work with me as another host. Anyways, on the first day he comes in, works his 1-hour training shift, and asks the manager to use his cell phone so he can call his mom to get him. This was around 2004, so cell phones weren't as common as they are now. The manager thinks nothing of it and gives him his phone. Then he just walked out immediately and left with his phone. The manager had to call his mom, and she brought it back a few hours later saying he has a bad habit of forgetting things and to not fire him. But he got fired anyway. It was the quickest I've seen anyone get fired. Dude I started with during an overnight, locked-in stocking position at Toys R Us went absolutely freaking mental. He worked about 1/4 of the shift, then started talking complete madness, then disappeared entirely, as in we couldn't find him anywhere. We'd see evidence he was still in the store, but we didn't see or hear him at all. After a couple of hours of this, he would suddenly leap into whatever aisle we were in and just start shrieking or laughing maniacally, or literally throwing merchandise at us. Bizarrely, he tried to show up the next day as if we were unaware of what went down. The lead guy said that happened a lot. Dudes just couldn't handle being locked in a silent, empty store all night. Why do you think we were hiring 3 guys at once for a 6-man crew? As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, reactions, and of course your own wild stories in the comments, and here's another video YouTube thinks you'll love.